Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are in early February. Spring training hasn't even started yet. Thought when I finished the last episode that in this episode we'd take things all the way through spring training, but that may not happen because there's a few things I want to talk about regarding international amateur free agency. Appreciate all the thoughts and comments in response to our last episode. And then I've also made a couple of pretty big trades between the end of the last episode and this episode that I want to talk through. Not blockbuster trades, but still trades that are going to involve players who are very familiar to those of you who have been watching us over the years. First, with international amateur free agency, two things to note. If you're looking closely, you may notice that I've upped our international amateur free agent budget to $5.23 million, and that's because our cap for this upcoming season has been increased. I still don't understand all the math behind how that works because we've been in the playoffs 10 straight years. We just had the best record in baseball. We've won World Series 2 of the last 4 seasons, and we're actually even at a spot right now where our budget is middle of the pack with the little boost we got to an all-time high of $236 million. That said, I'll certainly take it. Happy to have an opportunity to spend a little extra money 11 months from now in international amateur free agency. You can also see that with some of the trades we've previously made, getting rid of some of the talent in our system to get Bobby Bolig's contract off of the books, and the fact that some players who were up with us last year are no longer listed as prospects. We're now lower end farm system, ranking 21st out of 32 overall. So hopefully with the moves that we made in international amateur free agency this year, we'll be able to supplement that a bit. Although our payroll flexibility for next year is limited, we do have a fair amount of money to spend now following some of these recent trades that we've made. So short term, that's going to give us an opportunity to actually boost scouting and player development up to, I think, the highest levels that we've ever had them during this playthrough, and certainly at the far end of the diminishing returns as far as the player development budget. And we still have got a fair amount of money if we want to sign players to a 1-year contract or bring on some players in trade over the course of this season as we try to guide this team back to the playoffs. We'll also note financially, we've had extreme fan loyalty and fan interest at 100 or higher for most of the past few years. Our market size this past off season was just jumped up to below average, so I thought that might enable me to tick the ticket prices up just slightly, and you can see only 1.4% from the average that we were a year ago. But even with a bigger market size, we're on pace to sell almost 6% less season tickets this year than we did a year ago. So it just seems like we're in a spot in Buffalo where we're kind of tapped out. And I was hoping that an increase in market size following what I would consider to be some pretty simple economic theory, given that we've got a fixed amount of tickets available, might allow us to increase the price on those tickets, but it does not seem as if the financial engine is working that way. So now to just a recap of what we did in international amateur free agency. Patrick DeBonis noted in the comments that he would have gone and used our full $4.75 million on Ernesto Zambrana from the start. And honestly, when I started the episode yesterday, and even when I kind of did the deepish dive into international amateur free agents at the start of the period near the episode, that was what I planned to do. So I think that's a good suggestion. He ended up going for $4.96 million to the Reds, but it's possible, although that all happened within the first 8 days of the international amateur free agent signing period, that if I had gone to 4.75 million right at the start, we may have gotten him. The thing that kind of freaked me out a little bit about Zambrana, and I think encouraged me to kind of try to spread a bit wider net, is something that both Dralix and Sakruth kind of noted in the comments to the episode as well. There's something messed up here with him. I don't understand how, with 80 potential stuff and movement and an 80 potential fastball change, sinker, and splitter, our scout thinks that he's only 2.5 star potential. And the OSA is very similar. They think he's 3-star potential, despite thinking that he's basically off the charts or near off the charts in all of those categories. And that disconnect is confusing to me. I can't ever recall seeing a situation with a player with those kind of potential ratings where it's not a 4, 4.5, 5-star potential player. So it's probably just a bug. I don't think the scouting is sophisticated enough that he can say, hey, this guy is 80 potential in all of these categories, but I think it's incredibly unlikely that he's actually going to reach that potential in most of these categories, so the potential rating is only 2.5. That's not really the way that I recall this working. It's not how I've seen it work before. But to me, there's a big disconnect here. And then it was also weird to go through this and just see all of these scouting reports, like on 3 scouting reports for him on the 17th, scouting reports the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 11th of November. I wasn't assigning all of this scouting. I mean, maybe it was because the international amateur free agent class came out. But it's weird to have these multiple scouting reports on the same day, and then basically a week in a row where we're getting 1 or 2 scouting reports every day, especially when they're not really telling us anything different. I mean, I guess it's good that our accuracy ultimately ended up very high at the point when we were getting ready to make a decision on Zambrana, although I guess it's only high now. But that disconnect between his scouting accuracy and what we thought the pitching ratings and the pitch qualities were kind of freaked me out a little bit at the last minute, particularly with not knowing what his personality was, and made me less willing to go all in on him. And as you know, if we watched the last episode, we made a offer to him and to 3 other players right at the start. We ended up missing out on Zambrana, but as a fake name and David Chesley noted, we ended up with a pretty diverse class of 3 players that do have relatively high-end potential. So I'm not disappointed with the class. Obviously, we'll be following what Zambrana does over the course of his career, because he could end up having a absolutely incredible career with those ratings. But the 3 guys we got, Juan Larios, happy with him, like some of the personality traits, has a little bit of speed, durable, looks like he could be a pretty useful major league hitter, corner outfielder if things turn out the way that we hope they can. We did also end up spending big on the shortstop Juan Palomo, another guy who has some good personality traits, pretty versatile defensively, although I don't think he's a Gold Glove winner, but with decent infield defense and a bat that looks like if he fully develops it could be well above average. Certainly happy to have a guy like Palomo in our organization. And then last but not least is the starting pitching prospect that we did get, Solano Taselli, left-hander, like the high work ethic, ground ball pitcher, ground baller tendencies, throws in the mid-90s already, a little bit older at over 18 years old, but think his stuff, movement, and control could all be above average. His fastball is not far off major league quality now. Sinker and his cutter are pretty solid. If that changeup develops, it could be he could be an excellent pitcher. Certainly not expecting that to develop, but I think that between Toselli, Palomo, and Larios, we've got three interesting guys to follow for many years to come, hopefully. And if any of you can explain to me in the comments the disconnect for Zambrana, I'd love to hear what the explanation is, because I can't recall ever seeing a player who has pitching rating potential and pitch potential that is clearly a 4.5 or 5-star potential prospect who the scouts only think is like 2.5 or 3-star potential with those ratings. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm probably missing something simple. So if you've got an idea on that, let me know. And now we will turn our attention to the trades that we made. We're obviously on the well, not obviously, but if you were following the end of the last episode, we're still on the same day as we were then, because after I finished recording that episode, I just kind of dug really deep on some of the trades and opportunities I had been looking at off and on throughout the episode, and some of the guys who I had been thinking about potentially trading away from our team. And as I said, I've made two. They're not blockbuster trades because there's no players in them that are like massive superstars, but there are definitely some players who have been among the top prospects in our system over the years who are no longer with us as we try to hopefully position this team for success this season and several seasons to come. The first trade we're going to talk about was really kind of an interesting one, I think. We ended up trading away both Alex Fellers and Darnell Polite, who those of you who follow us closely will remember are the two players that we picked off of waivers right at the start of last season. Fellers spent most of the year in AAA Albany for us, where he did well, was up very briefly in Buffalo. He didn't have any more minor league options yet. And although he is a left-handed bat, which we could use, his defensive limitations, his lack of speed, and his probably slightly above average bat weren't an attractive enough combination for me to not be willing to move on from him, especially without minor league options. And then we also traded away reliever Darnell Polite, who, as I mentioned, we picked up in waivers last year. Had a pretty nice year for us, more than a strikeout per inning. But we are in a situation right now where Mike Waters has been up and down, another right-handed reliever for us for the last 3 seasons. He's out of options at this point, and it was really kind of him, Waters, and Polite fighting for a roster spot. So I feel like even if Waters is a little bit of a downgrade from Polite, didn't mind giving him up. Then we had to give up minor league second baseman Alan McGraw. He is not a big-time prospect, did hit .274 with 23 homers in Class A last year, but he's been stopped at Class A for the last 3 seasons, so was happy to include him. Other than Polite and Fellers, though, the valuable prospect we gave up was Mike Coleman. This is a guy we picked in the 3rd round a couple years ago. He's a starting pitching prospect, split last year between rookie ball and A ball. Was reasonably effective in A ball, was incredibly effective in rookie ball. Has some positive personality traits. Certainly looks like if those pitches and that stuff continue to develop, he could be a good, solid number 4 or 5 starter at the major league level. He's a lefty. Don't think he's ever going to be a front-end starter, but a back-of-the-rotation guy or perhaps an effective lefty out of the bullpen. Think he could definitely fill that role in the majors for a decade. So I didn't love giving him up, but you may remember from when we did the minor league system review a couple of episodes ago, we've got a fair amount of young starting pitchers who look like they're more fourth or fifth starters or middle relievers than top-notch prospects. So I didn't mind including Coleman because what we got back was a young right-handed pitcher, Joe Scott, who could potentially end up being our closer. We don't have a we technically do have a hole at closer because the two primary closers we had last year are no longer with us. But with guys like Jimenez and Vallejo and Veliz in our bullpen, in addition to Walborn, who's going to stay in that stopper role, we've got guys who I think are good enough to close. But I was really intrigued by Joe Scott's incredible stuff with his excellent fastball and cutter, really good movement on his pitches with ground ball tendencies, so he shouldn't give up a ton of homers. The control has a chance of getting to average. He made a weird jump last year from high A ball all the way to the majors with San Diego. In a small sample size, he had a 2.51 ERA and a 1.53 ERA plus. His FIP minus, however, was 125, and he was below replacement level pitcher. He walked 9 batters in those 14 and a third innings and did give up 2 runs. So the results from him were definitely mixed as a 22-year-old in the majors. But I just feel like he is a higher-end potential arm for our bullpen than either Polite is or I expect that Coleman will be, and felt like bringing on a guy who maybe develops into a closer for us and only has 55 days of major league service, so he's going to be very cheap for the next few seasons, and he's also still a guy who has 3 option years left. If we want to have him in the minors for a little more seasoning, felt like he's kind of the highest potential guy in the trade. And anytime you can make a trade where you get the best player out of it's something to definitely consider. So, as I said, Fellers had no options left and was a borderline roster guy. Coleman, we think, is a 5th starter. McGraw, we don't care if we lose him. And Polite, although a good reliever, we think that Scott is younger and potentially better. So that was the rationale behind making that deal. And the second trade is the one that's going to be players who are even more familiar with those who have been following us over the years. But we have moved on from Tyreek Hardage, who has been a outfielder for us in the majors for the last 4 seasons. He was a guy that we picked in the 2nd round back in 2028, was at times considered one of the top 100 prospects in baseball. Have to be realistic about what he is, and talked about him during this past off season, as I wasn't even sure whether I wanted to bring him back as an arbitration eligible player. We ended up doing that, but he's 28 years old right now, and through 4 years in the majors, admittedly with part-time action for the last 3 of them, he's never once been an above average offensive player, in terms of his OPS plus and his WRC plus or his WRAA. He does have value because he is good on the base paths and he's good defensively, but he was a 4th or 5th outfielder for us this upcoming season, so I didn't mind including him in the deal. Arturo Flores, another right-handed hitter, is also gone. Flores is a guy we signed as an international amateur free agent. He was one of the few guys over the years that we've spent most of our money on, ended up costing us $4.4 million. So one of the bigger investments that we've ever made for an individual player in IAFA. And he's a 25-year-old right-handed hitter. Love the durability, love the captain personality, but he's no good defensively. He's no good on the base paths. And looking at his ratings, he's really a borderline playable guy against right-handed pitching. All of his value is against left-handed pitching. So a guy who is kind of an average guy against right-handed pitching, who's good against left-handed pitching 30 or 40 games a year. Just decided that we were willing to move on from him while he still had hopefully a little bit of trade value. He's a guy who's basically been an average-ish offensive player for us any way you kind of crack it up over the years. Hasn't gotten a ton of playing time, which probably is a little bit unfair to him, but is a right-handed hitter with that pretty pedestrian batting profile against right-handed pitching and his defensive limitations, and the fact that this is his last year making the major league minimum, and he's expected to be a arbitration eligible guy, likely making $3 or so million next year. We decided to move on from him. So in return for Hardage and Flores, and there certainly was no guarantee that both of those players were going to make our roster. When we were thinking about our 26-man roster, it was certainly very conceivable that one of them would end up in AAA or needing to be traded before the season. And you could even make a scenario where neither of them would have made the 26-man roster. So although they have value, they were borderline value for us. We picked up minor league left fielder Luis Carlo. I like the speed. I like the defensive ability. I like the personality. I just don't think he's actually a major league hitter. Hit 273, did have 32 homers in high A ball this year, but we think he's going to be a below average contact hitter, well below average home run power, below average eye. He'll get some extra base hits with that gap power and that speed, but he's also 25 years old and he's still in high A ball. So he was really just a throw-in, quite honestly. Think he could be, if we expand a roster in September at some point and we need a guy who's a pinch runner and defensive substitute in the outfield for whatever reason, injuries or whatnot, with a left-handed bat, maybe he's got some value there, but don't think he's a big-time player. But the guy that we based this on was bringing Mike Broaden on board. And you'll remember that we traded away our lefty power hitter, Bobby Bolig, this past off season to free up some salary space to do other things, most notably re-signing Big Baby Medina to be our starting catcher. But that left us a little weak in terms of left-handed batters, particularly with power. Bringing back Mike Heiner, and we're going to give Carranza a chance at first base. And then we've still got Anderson at shortstop, but he's not really a big-time hitter and a big-time power hitter. And then Juan Estrada is our two-way pitcher / outfielder who has absolutely no power, although he's a decent left-handed bat. So felt like our lineup was overweighted towards right-handed hitters, and we could use a left-handed hitter with a decent bat. So that's why we ended up trading away the right-handed hitters Hardage and Flores, and we brought on 25-year-old center fielder Mike Broaden in return for those two guys. And Broaden I like. I don't love him. If he had more speed, I would like him a little bit more, but he is certainly a very competent defensive outfielder. Could play center or left. He's probably, with that arm, a potential Gold Glove caliber right fielder. And his profile is certainly of an above average hitter. He could end up in a platoon role with us because he's very good potentially against right-handed pitching. Not incredible home run power, to be fair, but still a guy who could hit 15, 18, 20, maybe even 25 homers a year in the best season of his career. But above average contact, not going to walk a ton, and as I said, he's borderline playable against left-handed pitching. But he does give us another left-handed bat with a little bit of pop, who's also a more than competent defensive player. Similar to both Flores and Hardage. He's got 3 or 4 years in the majors at this point. In his case, 2+ seasons. He's put up a 107 WRC plus, so he's been slightly more effective offensively over the course of his major league career than either Flores or Hardage has been. So it's another situation, and you can see he's got 21 and 19 homers basically playing full-time the last couple of years. So he's not going to be a massive home run hitter. Strikes out too much, doesn't walk all that much. Viewing him as a 6 or 7 kind of hitter for us. Certainly not someone who's going to be at the top of the order, but felt, given that we didn't think that both Flores and Hardage were going to be making the roster next year, and given that Brodin over the course of his career has been a more productive offensive player than either Flores or Hardage, and is also a pretty good defensive outfielder, felt like we were getting the best player back in this deal as well. So probably means that Brodin will be our starting right fielder. I think Heiner will end up in left, and then some combination of Gaglia and the youngster Elmquist in center. And then we've still got Gallagher, who will likely be our DH. The other part of this trade that made me think about it was we did bring back Joe Edwards, another right-handed hitter this past offseason, who, although he's coming off of an off year, has been over the course of his career much more productive than either Hardage or Flores. With the addition of Arp to potentially be our second baseman and moving Seifu to third base, at-bats were going to be pretty hard to come by for Joe Edwards. But now with the fact that we've cleared out a right-handed hitting first baseman / corner outfielder in Flores and a right-handed hitting outfielder in Hardage, that should open up an opportunity for us to get some more at-bats for Joe Edwards here in his second to last season before he can potentially be a free agent. So that was another thing that factored into my decision-making to move on from both Hardage and Flores and to bring Brodin on board. And even with the increases to our scouting and development budgets, as well as the international amateur free agent budget, with getting some of those salaries off the books and also getting a little money back in both of those trades, as you saw, we've got plenty of money available right now to, as I talked about earlier, bring on a guy on a 1-year deal or trade for a guy in the final year of his contract as the season moves along. We still, with this amount of money available, have the hole at backup catcher. I'm still not particularly excited about the options that are available. Lemus, although he's good defensively, just doesn't have enough of a bat. Campbell Smithwick is still looking for way too much money and way too many years for what he is. If 6 weeks from now Smithwick is still on the market, he's a guy who I would consider bringing in as a backup catcher for next year. But I've kind of gotten to the point where I'm kind of comfortable going with the plan that I touched on a bit in previous episodes. Medina's going to be the starter. We brought in David Aldretti as a Rule 5 acquisition, who is an excellent defensive catcher. I don't think he's going to hit enough to be a major leaguer, and we're going to have to promote a guy who was only in high A ball to the majors to keep him in our organization. But right now, my thought is to David Aldretti, if we want to go with defense, or Ted Jackson, the veteran in our system, if we want to go with a guy who may have a little bit better bat, but not as much defensively as the backup. Those are kind of the two options for the backup for Medina this year. Neither one is perfect, but neither one is horrible, because Jackson, I think, is arguably a better hitter than your typical backup catcher, and Aldretti is certainly a potentially better defensive catcher than your typical backup catcher. And then the plan, I think, at this point is to promote Jorge Berrios to AAA, let him play there every day this year. And then my thought would be that in the 2039 season, Medina is our starter, and Berrios is going to be our backup in the majors and potentially the replacement 3 or 4 years down the line for Medina. I think with that incredible eye, his on-base percentage could be interesting at the major league level, even though he's not all that great a hitter. And he's a bit above average defensively in terms of his catcher ability and his catcher arm. So rather than go crazy trying to bring in some big-time backup for Medina, especially given that Medina is durable and hopefully will be out there for 120 to 130 games for us, thought is either to go with Jackson or Aldrete as the backup this year, with the thought that Berrios is going to be Medina's backup by the 2039 season. And we actually have a couple other interesting young catchers in our system as well. I can show you them if I can find them. Maybe he's still down in the DSL. Yeah, Luis Soriano, 20-year-old in the DSL, was a scouting discovery in 2033. Like his defense, question is whether he's going to make enough contact to stay in the majors, but does have a little bit of pop in his bat. So he is a somewhat interesting prospect for the future. Rory Drain is a guy who's came up through our system. Definitely more of a backup catcher profile, but he's competent, durable, some decent personality traits. He made it to AA briefly at the end of last year. Probably will be the starter in AA this year as we promote Berrios up to AAA to likely replace Jackson. So I don't think right now we're going to go crazy trying to bring on any of these catchers who are available. Again, if Campbell Smithwick gets into a situation where he's not looking for big money and he's only looking for a 1-year deal, we'd consider it. Right now, he's looking for 3 years. With the fact that I think Berrios is going to be our backup in a year, we don't need to do that. And the other, the other factor is we probably could pay Campbell Smithwick $7.5 million a year. It's really just going to be we only want him for a 1-year deal, and I don't think he's quite at this point. So it isn't even necessarily something where his dollar demand needs to come down materially. Might be more something where it's just a matter of he's got to realize he's not going to get multiple years from us. With the 60 ability and the 60 arm, he's not a big-time offensive player, and at 32 years old, he's had plenty of time in the majors to show that he's a below-average offensive player, but still decent defensively, and would certainly consider him to be backup catcher. But as I outlined, I'm also kind of okay-ish with the guys that we have in our organization right now to kind of piece that backup catcher position together this year and then potentially move on, as I said, to Berrios being the regular backup next season. So since I spent a fair amount of time kind of debriefing international amateur free agency and going over those 2 trades that we've made, probably only going to sim up to the beginning of spring training, which is just another 3+ weeks. And then we'll conclude this episode, and then I can do a deeper dive into spring training in the next episode before we begin the regular season. So I don't think there's going to be too much activity over the next few weeks. If you looked closely before when we were on the transaction screen, you see we've made offers to several players to round out our minor league system, including attempting to bring Samuel Basallo back, for those of you who were wondering. Probably just going to be some more minor league free agent signings over the next few weeks. Maybe someone will throw an interesting trade offer our way, and we'll see how the market for Campbell Smithwig evolves over the next few weeks. But probably not a ton of activity. And if you're watching this video, you'll know by whether there's 2 or 3 minutes left in the video or 15 or 20 minutes left in the video at this point, whether something interesting happened. And one other thing that those of you who watched the previous episode probably were already aware of that I had forgotten about, and I just realized one of the top free agent catchers, Luis Lemus, who was available, is a guy that at the end of the last episode we made an offer to with a minor league contract with a major league option. So he will also be in the mix to potentially be our backup catcher. I'd say maybe in a bit of a way, I would view him as a compromise candidate between the other guys that we talked about, because he's very good defensively. And I guess my hope was that his bat might be better than the Rule 5 catcher's bat, Aldretti. But that's not even 100% certain. So it'll be interesting to get these guys into camp, get them scouted 1 or 2 more times to just make sure we know exactly what we're dealing with. But right now we are in a situation where Aldretti and Jackson and now wherever he ended up, Lemus, who will move up to Albany. We've got to tweak all of these lineups at this point. They've just been sitting out there since the end of last season, and players that we've signed have been assigned to the FCL and the DSL teams at the lowest level, even though if they're going to end up playing at higher levels. So that's something that I spend a fair amount of time offline working on that I don't need to subject you loyal viewers to. But right now we've got Lemus, Aldretti, and Jackson likely in a 3-way battle to be the backup catcher for Medina this upcoming season, and we'll continue to monitor what happens with Soupy Smithwick. And we've made it to the start of spring training, so that means we've made it to the end of this relatively short episode. The big eventfulness were the 2 trades that happened offline that I wanted to walk through my rationale for with all of you. And if you've got thoughts on those trades, always useful to hear them. In retrospect, it's not like I can do anything to change it now, but always interesting to hear different perspectives and what others would have done similarly or differently to the decisions that I've ended up making over the course of the years. So in our next episode, we're going to do a deep dive in spring training, figure out which 50, 55 people are going to initially be in camp with us, try to keep the team healthy, and then ultimately make some interesting roster decisions. I think with the trades that we've made at this point, the 12th and 13th guys on our pitching staff perhaps in question. Feel like maybe one position player is kind of in question, and then figuring out who our backup catcher is going to be the biggest thing to figure out. Taking a look at Campbell Smithwick, who we could get into the mix, and he's only looking for a 1-year deal now, so that will be something for me to consider at the top of our next episode. We certainly have the money to afford it at this point. And I do think that in terms of the combination of solid defense with offense that is at least likely not going to be pathetic, Smithwick is probably the best alternative for us at backup catcher compared to the 3 guys that I mentioned Aldretti, Jackson, and Mr. Lemus. But he's probably the most even combination of a decent bat and a decent glove. I think arguably his bat might be a little worse than Jackson, but his glove is definitely better than Jackson. And I think his bat is probably a little better than Aldretti or Lemus, but his glove is not as good as those guys. So he's kind of the compromise candidate. But although we've got the money to spend, he doesn't really seem to me to be a $7.5 million player at this point in his career. So I think there's certainly the argument, just go with the guys that we've got rather than potentially pursue Campbell Smithwick. But any thoughts that viewers have on that topic will likely be helpful to me as well, and certainly would love to hear them. So until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.